Here are my highlights from day 3 of the London Chess Classic Rapid Play Tournament. This was the final day of the group stages, so that would be decided who would go forward to the knockout stages, and it looked like the cream was rising to the top. The strong players were all doing very well, but the underdogs still had a chance. Let's join the game between Peter Svidler from Russia and Jonathan Rowson from Scotland. Well, Rowson is battling very well. Svidler actually probably could have won earlier, but by this stage Rowson looks like he should be able to make a draw. Svidler, with the white pieces, is this extra pawn up in a rook and pawn endgame. But black's pieces are very active indeed. The rook in the best position behind the pawn, and the king very active as well on this square. So Rowson doing well at this stage, should be able to hold a draw, which might give him a chance to qualify. Rook e6, the rook defends the pawn. Now that's the best place to defend the pawn. If the rook had gone in front of the pawn, then it's too passive. Black draws very easily. So at least this way there's some influence over this side of the board. But still, black very active and looking like has good drawing chances. Now the rook hits the 7th rank, preventing the king striding up the board. Good idea. And now a very tricky move from Svidler. Now Rowson moved the king to the side here. It looks like he missed a clear draw. This is very nice. King takes pawn looks very dangerous indeed, because it seems as though black's king is entering a mating net. There's a threat of g3 check, and well, for example, if black is very, very careless, something like this could happen, and rook takes pawn and g3 checkmate. But let's go back, because there's a big trick here. We've been overlooking something. Here it's not just checkmate. In fact, black can get a stalemate with this move, and king takes, and the king has no moves. Stalemate, a very common theme in rook and pawn endings. And if we go back, let's go back to this position. Supposing the king comes up the board, then it's still going to be stalemate. So the rook keeps checking. Now let's suppose the king tries to escape these checks. Okay, we keep checking, and here it comes. You can just give the rook up. King takes rook and it's still stalemate. And if the king tries to avoid this, well, basically it can't avoid the suicide rook, and again that's stalemate. So it's a very neat way to draw actually, but easy to overlook when you're just down to your last few seconds, particularly when it looks like it could be a checkmating net that you're walking into. But Rowson played king to f5, and this is already a little bit tricky, because to some extent that pawn is fixed there. If black does nothing, then the king might be able to wander up the board. I think this is black's best chance for a draw, to exchange off these pawns, but this is still touch and go. I'm not sure whether black can hold a draw here. It's very tricky indeed. But Rowson snapped off the pawn at the side of the board. Now he'd seen that, well, if the pawn advances, of course the rook will go behind and black draws. And I'm sure he'd seen this as well, and that his rook could come back to stop the pawn. Unfortunately, it's just too passive now, and this is actually a very simple win by Zugzwang. The king is going to come in and take these pawns. Let's just see how this works in practice. So this is just a waiting move to see which way the king is going to go. And Rowson came back, and in this position black resigned. It's Zugzwang. If the rook moves, then the pawn queens, and if the king goes to the side, then here's the point. We take the pawn with check, and then we can come back to protect the pawn, and we take the second pawn, and that is a very easy win. Well, we can threaten to come over here and queen this one. Basically, black can't deal with both those threats. rook and pawn endings are so tricky. So in that group, Svidler and Kramnik went through. Sadler couldn't quite manage to defeat one of them. Okay, let's go back and have a look at the game between Sutovsky and Howell. I'd like to have a look at the two qualifiers for the Rapid Play tournament. There were two qualifiers who got 4 out of 4 in the Open tournament, that's classical chess, and that qualified for them to play in the Rapid Play. Now, it's slightly odd because they're not really Rapid Play specialists. They got to the tournament by getting 4 out of 4 in classical chess, so you know it's a bit rough for them actually. And Emil Sutovsky, a very, very talented player indeed, so a really brave, bold attacking player. I don't think Rapid Play is really his speciality. He needs to, when he plays his games, he invests a lot of time in order to find very creative attacking ideas. So he really suffered in this tournament. However, he did manage to win his last game, and I think we should pay him a tribute by looking at this game. I'm going to join the game in this position. It's a dreaded Berlin variation. No, not everyone's favourite. You can see that familiar Berlin pawn structure. But Sutovsky has done something quite interesting, which is to advance this pawn, and that cramps Black's king. So for once, Black hasn't been able to play b6 and king b7 to coordinate his rooks. So Howell has a few difficulties here, and I think with a longer time control, then Black ought to be able to solve his problems. But Howell didn't manage it here. Let's see what happens. So first of all, David Howell exchanged off bishop for knight, and exchanged off rooks, and brought the knight over here. Well, this doesn't look bad because it's attacking 2 pawns, but of course that one can't be taken because of checkmate. So you can see it's still not so easy for Black. And if you try and improve the position of your king, play king b7, then a6 keeps the king bottled in. So this is quite difficult actually for Black, particularly when you have very little time. Howell manoeuvred his knight to blockade these E and F pawns. But watch what happens. This is very nasty. Now this is a great example of the power of the rook and bishop actually. So Sutovsky has won a pawn, but that knight is doing a very good blockading job. Black's problem is actually that he's running very short of moves here. The king can't really come up the board because then the rook slams down on the 7th rank, and that's absolutely disastrous. And you can see the bishop controls the f8 square, which the rook would like to go to defend. Incidentally, that b4 move was very important because it protected the bishop, so Black doesn't have king c6 attacking both those pieces. Let's go back. So after this move, well, Howell is just waiting, but watch how Sutovsky improves his position little by little. You don't need to rush here. Now the idea is to bring the king in here, and even if Black stops the king coming in with h6, then pawn to h5, and well, that's very unpleasant indeed. So Howell played h5, but this is also not very pleasant. Howell running short of moves here. He retreated the knight, but now excellent pawn sacrifice. So this breaks up the pawns, allows the white king to enter the position. If pawn takes, then well, just king here, and after we attack the knight, the knight's got to move. You take here, the king's in, and you advance the pawns. Hopeless. So knight takes pawn. And now the king comes in anyway, so it's found a route into Black's position. Howell attempting to activate the rook, but it's too late. And now there's a threat of mate. If the rook comes here, White can exchange and take the pawn. And if rook here, okay, this is what happened. And Howell has no decent moves here. And that is the end of the game, forcing the rook away from the protection of the f-pawn. Let's say here, And that really is over. So very nice technique from Emil Sutovsky, a very, very strong player. Unfortunately, both Sutovsky and Hal were eliminated, but, well, they gave us some very interesting chess indeed. Okay, I'd like to have a look at a game from the other qualifier, the other qualifier to the rapid play, Andrei Istratescu, who also sadly didn't play very well. But he did manage to win this last game. Let's have a look at his game against Luke McShane. I'm going to zip through these moves very, very quickly. McShane plays, or attempts to play, the so-called hippopotamus opening. That's where you play your knights into the middle, to d7 and e7, your bishop to g7, and maybe strike out later on with perhaps c5 or e5. Actually, a very respectable system, not to be underestimated. But Istratescu plays excellently and actually doesn't allow McShane to get this hippopotamus setup. In this position, Istratescu cuts across it straight away with pawn to e5. This is worth remembering. Basically, black can't get his setup with knight e7, bishop g7 and so on. This is en prise. If this is taken, then the knight takes, and this looks very pleasant for white. So it's almost forced that black has to close the position and go for a kind of French structure. So it's basically a French defence, you can see that here, but a very favourable French defence for white, because basically these moves, let me just highlight these, the knight and the bishop are poorly placed, white is way ahead in development, and e5 and d4, which so often come under fire in the French, are completely rock solid. So excellent strategy from Istratescu. And now watch how he develops his play on the king side. This is very nice. I think the problem with rapid play is that when you're defending, when you're under pressure, it's very difficult to invest the time to try and cut across your opponent's plans. And McShane never managed to do that in this game. He never managed to break white's initiative, to stop white's initiative here. So that knight is going to come around to this square, looks very inviting indeed. But in fact, Istratescu found another plan. I mean, knight g4 is possible, but let's see what he did. Okay, he's forced the pawn to g5, and now he's just going to open the position. Notice how he's basically ignoring McShane's play on the queen side. That's best to do that, if you just carry on with your own plan here. And now McShane has put this bishop back here, trapping in white's rook. You'll notice the bishop doesn't have any free squares along this diagonal, but it really doesn't matter, because the pressure on f7 is too strong. And here, for example, the threat is to play rook takes pawn, and when queen takes, bishop g6 wins the queen. So the knight has to come back. Now the knight comes in. Okay, McShane tries to run away with the king, but, well, I mean, rook takes pawn, I think, is probably winning in this position. But, okay, Istratescu gets his bishop out like this, so if pawn takes bishop, then we can just take the bishop here. And this is winning very, very easily. I'm just going to go through the rest of the game very, very quickly, but it really doesn't need much explanation. You can see that black's pieces are caught on the queen side, all white's pieces are excellently placed, and this is a very, very simple win indeed. Well, that rook gets taken, but look what's happened to white's bishop there. Terrible position for black, because there is zero counterplay, and this is very, very painful for Luke. I'm afraid he didn't have his best day, but I'm very glad that he and Andrei Istratescu and Emil Sutovsky at least did manage to win a game right at the death, and now it's time to clean up and checkmate. There we go, the king has no more moves. So at the end of the group stage, all the strongest players qualified for the quarterfinals. So we have Kramnik versus Anand coming up for the first quarterfinal, Adams against Fidler, Caruana against Gelfand, and Short against Nakamura. Do join me tomorrow and I'll let you know how those quarterfinals went. Thank you.